Hebrews 5 verses 9 to 10. The perfected priest and the eternal salvation he brings. And having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, having been designated by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. The garden has given way to the grave, and the grave to glory. From the tears of Gethsemane to the triumph of resurrection, Hebrews now gathers the whole arc of the Son's obedient suffering into a single, blazing claim. The one who prayed and bled has been perfected for priestly work and now stands as the living fountain of salvation. The language tightens, the lens sharpens. We are shown not only what Christ endured, but what that endurance achieved, his consecration as our high priest and the unending efficacy of the rescue he accomplished. Hebrews 5 verses 9 to 10 declares that through suffering Christ was perfected for priestly office, became the eternal source of salvation for the obedient, and was publicly designated by God as high priest according to the superior order of Melchizedek. First, perfected for priestly office, suffering as consecration. The text opens, having been made perfect, using the verb teleotes, a favorite in Hebrews. Thayer notes its range: to complete, to bring to the goal, to consecrate for sacred service. Kittel highlights its cultic color. The idea is not moral improvement, for the Son is sinless, but vocational completion, ordained fitness for the holy task. Earlier the preacher has said it was fitting that God should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through sufferings. Hebrews 2 verse 10. Now the curtain lifts on the finished consecration. By obeying through agony, by entering death and being raised, ek thanatu, out of death, Christ reached the goal set before him, not merely to model obedience, but to be installed as the priest who mediates the benefits of his obedience. Reformed voices underscore this point with one song in many parts. Calvin stresses that the pathway of humiliation was not an accident, but the appointed road to enthronement. Hodge and Hendrickson emphasized that priestly fitness required experiential suffering, so that mercy would be more than a mood. It would be his very ministry. Bruce and Schreiner traced the argument's logic from chapter 5 verse 7 to 8 into chapter 5 verse 9. The Son's reverent fear was heard, and the resurrection became the Father's vindication of the Son's priestly consecration. Thus, teleotes, here, is the bell that tolls consecration accomplished. The cross is his ordination, the empty tomb, his public investiture. Second, the eternal source for the obedient, salvation that does not expire. He became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. Three terms demand careful hearing. First, itios, source, author, personal cause. Thayer and Kittel agree. The word does not name a distant origin, but an active, effective agent. Christ is not a consultant to salvation. He is its living cause. Second, soterias ioniou, eternal salvation. The adjective ioneos stresses quality and duration. What he gives does not thin with time, does not require renewal like the Levitical rites. In contrast to sacrifices that aged and priests who died, his priesthood and the salvation it secures abide. Third, to all who obey him. Passin tois hupakiusinado. Robertson notes the present participle's durative force, not a single nod of agreement, but a life bent in believing obedience. Moo and Haldane help us keep grace at the center. This obedience is the obedience of faith, trust that submits, allegiance that adores. John 14, verse 23. Faith receives, faith also follows. The text will not let us pry apart what God has joined. Here the old shadows fall away. Aaron could announce pardon, but could not author it. His sacrifices could cover for a season, but could not cure. Christ, says Barnes, is the personal mediating cause of a salvation that stretches from now into the everlasting ages, and he grants it to those who, having heard his voice, keep listening with their lives. Third, designated by God, a priest in the order that outlives death. Verse 10 seals the scene. Having been designated by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. The verb prosegereutes, publicly named, addressed as, signals divine declaration. This is not self-promotion, but sovereign proclamation. The phrase, Kata Tain Tashin Melchizedek, reaches back to Psalm 110 verse 4 and forward to the long exposition yet to come. Thayer glosses taxis as a fixed order or rank. Kittle hears in it a form different in kind from Aaron's line. Hendrickson and Doriani draw out the pastoral comfort. Melchizedek's order is royal and perpetual, unstained by lineage or law, grounded in oath rather than ancestry. F. Bruce and Schreiner note the hinge function of this verse, concluding the proof that Christ meets every priestly qualification, and pivoting to demonstrate the superiority of his priesthood in chapters 6 to 7. In other words, heaven itself has posted the notice. The risen Son is not merely a priest. He is this priest, of the order that cannot be annulled and does not end. Reflections for today. Let the word perfected steady you. Your Savior's sufferings were not random. They were the road to your rescue. If his consecration came through a cross before a crown, why should your sanctification come by another path? The Father wastes no wounds. In his hands, pain becomes instruction. Trials become the training ground of trust. When obedience feels like fire, remember, the flames that formed your priest now refine his people. Let the phrase the source of eternal salvation gladden you. Your salvation does not hang on yesterday's resolve or today's performance. It hangs on a living Christ who is himself the cause and continuance of your rescue. When assurance flickers, look not inward to the candle, but outward to the sun. He is the source, and his salvation is eternal. It will outlast your weakness, outlive your fears, and outshine every night. Let the description for all who obey him search you. Grace does not breed indifference. It births obedience. Where is he calling you to concrete, costly allegiance? Perhaps to forgive when the wound is still tender, to confess when pride resists, to practice purity when the world mocks, to rest when busyness calls your name. Obedience is not the price of salvation, but the pathway on which the redeemed walk with their priest. When resistance rises, bring it beneath his yoke. The one who learned obedience through suffering now lends strength for yours. And let the title high priest after the order of Melchizedek comfort you. The world is noisy with endings. Leaders fail, systems fracture, seasons close. But your priest belongs to an order that began in the counsel of God and continues without successor or sunset. When you pray, you do not queue before a distant deity. You come to the living intercessor whose priesthood never grows weary. He carries your name not on a breastplate of stones, but on a heart once pierced and now enthroned. Conclusion. Here the gospel gathers into a single sentence. The Son, perfected through suffering, stands forever as the source of eternal salvation for all who walk the obedience of faith, having been publicly declared by God a high priest in the order of Melchizedek, a priesthood that never dies. In him, consecration gives birth to compassion, priesthood yields pardon, and salvation stretches into the endless ages. Take your failures to his finished work, your fears to his living intercession, your future to his unfading office, and walk on, obeying, because your priest will not, cannot fail.